Let's bring in our panel now. Michael Oren is the former Israeli ambassador to the United States. Mick Mulvaney served as President Trump's chief of staff in his first term. He's now a News Nation contributor. Great to have both of you here. Ambassador, I still watch these images and they bring me to tears. It was an extraordinary thing today, what happened in Israel. These reunions were so moving. You said there's an unwritten covenant that Israel will do everything in its power to free soldiers or civilians captured in battle, and today it finally happened.
It's true, Elizabeth, and I'm still deeply moved. I've seen these pictures repeatedly all day long, and every time you show them, it brings me to the verge of tears. And I know so many of these families personally. I also know two of the families who received the remains of their loved ones today, and there are now 24 families who are still remaining to have not received the remains of their families, and that is a continuing agony for all of them. We have to keep that in mind as well. But this is a very joyous moment for these families. It is a moment of triumph for President Trump and his team, and I believe it's a breakthrough moment for the entire Middle East. Yeah,
two of those families, those hostages who are presumed dead, are American citizens. Their families have been on this show a lot. There's a real question, Ambassador, tonight as to where are the remaining dead hostages and why and if they'll ever even be returned.
Well, keep in mind, Hamas is a terrorist organization. It's not an honest broker. Hamas engages not just in physical terror, but also in emotional and psychological terror. And the way they can keep Israel in a state of emotional terror, being terrorized, is by denying the closure to these families. And it is exquisitely painful. I know it's very difficult sometimes for people not living in Israel to understand this covenant that we have with our people that will do everything to redeem the hostages, whether they're living or dead, by the way. There's not like an extra premium put on living hostages at the expense of non-living hostages. So the big question, it's very much connected to the major issue, which is how do then we move to phase two, which is the president himself said, is the disarmament of Hamas, getting Hamas to give up its guns, because the other 19 or 18 points on that 20 points cannot be implemented as long as Hamas remains in Gaza and remains armed.
Mick, President Trump was hailed throughout the Middle East today for this achievement. Here's a look at the cover of Time magazine with the words, "His Triumph." The Washington Post editorial page called it, quote, "a generational accomplishment."
How is it not? I mean, it's a little bit surprising to see that level of accolade coming from those outlets. But it's also nice to see something a little bit objective. This is something that many, many American presidents have wanted. The Biden team was not able to do it. This is a tremendous success, even if it falls apart, Elizabeth, even if it lasts 48 hours. And I hate to sort of be negative about it, but even if that were to happen, it would still be a huge success because he got the living hostages home. There's so much good that has happened because of what the Trump administration has done here. I think the arc of history has now changed closer to a long-term peace. Iran is no longer the bully of the neighborhood. There's so many things that have happened positively that bear well for peace in the region for years to come.
Ambassador, you said today happened. This ceasefire and the hostage release happened because President Trump was willing to exercise what you called brute muscular power in a way that no previous American president had. What do you mean by that?
Well, on the contrary, previous presidents have said they're not going to use power, brute or otherwise, in the Middle East. And the Middle East is an area where power is respected. And the fact that the president was willing to project power, first against the Houthis in Yemen, then most effectively against Iran, gained him tremendous leverage and respect in the Middle East. That, combined with the personal relationships which the president has established with leaders throughout the region, his envoys, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, have personal friendships throughout the region. Diplomacy is like anything else in life. It's 90% it's personal relationships. And previous administrations, keep in mind, whether it's the Obama administration, the Biden administration, almost didn't talk to Prime Minister Netanyahu, didn't talk to other Middle Eastern leaders like the Saudis for a long time. And you can't turn around and not use power and not develop these personal relationships and expect to have leverage. You're just not.
Well, I think President Biden talked to him a lot. He just didn't have the effect that President Trump ended up having.
Well, for 2 years before October 7th.
Got it.
If you remember, Benjamin Netanyahu and the Saudi prince were persona non grata at the White House. And that's not the case with this team. This team has actually gone out and established these very close rapports and trust with these disparate leaders. Look at these 20 points. You get countries here, Turkey and Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Indonesia, Pakistan, that don't agree with one another, much less with Israel. To get them to all sign on these 20 points is a work, I think, of almost unprecedented diplomatic elegance.
Mick,
and it'll go down the history books.
Mick, the ambassador brings up Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. I was fascinated by a report today that came out that said that both Witkoff and Kushner met personally with the 4 leaders of Hamas to get this deal over the finish line. That's extraordinary for 2 people of their stature, 2 men who are Jewish, to do this, to personally meet with them and guarantee that Trump will enforce this 20-point plan.
Yeah, what I think a lot of folks have forgotten about, Elizabeth, is the work that Jared Kushner did on the Abraham Accords during the first Trump administration. He's had relationships there now for a long time. I'm glad to hear the ambassador articulate it much better than I ever could. But what he said was, look, you have to build up credibility. You have to build up respect. And that's what the Trump administration has been able to do. And I do come back to the same thing that that President Netanyahu said today in the Knesset, was that I think the turning point here was the attack on Iran. I think not only was it the turning point for this particular discussion, for these negotiations on Gaza specifically, I think it's the turning point in the region. That's where the arc of history changes more towards a chance for having peace, because Iran, the bully in the neighborhood, has been defanged because of brute American military force that so many people were afraid to use before. So, look, what do they say? You know, the best way to prepare for peace is to prepare for war. And Donald Trump actually was able to accomplish something that many previous presidents were unwilling to do. And I think we'll pay the benefits of it now for a long time to come.
All right. So, Ambassador, you've alluded to this already. What does happen next? The ceasefire still holds as of this hour, but Hamas is still in Gaza. So far, Hamas has not given up any weapons, and it still has access to 2/3 of its network of tunnels. We're talking hundreds of miles of tunnels underground. As you yourself said, giving up arms and surrendering goes against the DNA of Hamas. How do you force them to do this?
Well, I don't think there's a major Israeli military option at this point. The Israeli army has pulled back from 47% of the Gaza Strip. The population of Gaza, of northern Gaza, has basically streamed back to their homes. So that's now you have that human shield in place for Hamas. But there are numerous tools at the disposal of President Trump and his team and our allies in the region. What are those tools? You deny cash and arms to Hezbollah. Now, they had free flow of cash from Qatar in the past. They had arms flowing in from Egypt across the Egyptian border in the past. That's going to stop. Most importantly, Hamas cannot get its hands on humanitarian aid. In the past, Hamas would steal up to 60% of all the humanitarian aid. They'd feed their own terrorists. Then they would sell that aid back to Palestinians at an exorbitant price, and that would enrich Hamas. They've got to cut that off, too. So we basically have to cut off all of their oxygen and empower other elements in Gaza, because there are clans, there are militias in Gaza that hate Hamas, that hold Hamas responsible for the deaths of these thousands of Palestinians, for the unspeakable destruction that has gone on there. They hold Hamas responsible, and they're going to there's going to be a comeuppance for them. I tell you honestly, and I'm not being too pedestrian here, I hope, but if I were a Hamas terrorist, I wouldn't walk around with open air with a gun right now.
Why?
Because people are going to go gunning for them. And even though Israel may not have
even though as recently as a couple of days ago, Hamas was, when there was word this deal was going to be made, there were reports that Hamas was going out and finding Palestinians they viewed as being too sympathetic to Israel or anti-Hamas and killing them.
And they, in turn, have been killed. It's been not as been widely reported. But even though I want to say that even though Israel doesn't have an option for a renewal of major military operations, that doesn't mean Israel can not engage in pinpoint surgical operations. And they can target individual Hamas terrorists and individual Hamas leaders. And if Hamas is in flagrant violation of the ceasefire accord by not returning the remains of these 24 murdered Israelis, by not disarming, by not giving up those guns, then Israel, with the backing of President Trump, and President Trump has said this, will be able to exert military pressure, maybe not major military pressure in the form of ground operations, but other measures, certainly will be backed, I think, by this administration.
From Israel, President Trump then flew to Egypt to, of course, celebrate and sign this agreement, which we haven't actually seen yet, the text of what he signed with the world leaders and Arab leaders. President Trump repeatedly, Mick, referred to in his remarks the enormous wealth of the Arab countries that helped pressure Hamas into taking this deal. Not to state the obvious, but those countries are extraordinarily rich, and according to Trump, it is them who are going to pay to rebuild Gaza.
Yeah, what I think he was doing today, both in Israel and then again in Egypt, was getting the other countries invested in the deal. To the ambassador's point, how do you beat Hamas? You choke them off. You choke off all their friends. The Iranians are no longer capable of doing what they were a year ago. The Qataris seem to be not interested in doing it anymore. They seem to be a lot more interested in being friends with the United States. Trump is building this coalition of people to sort of say, look, we want you on the side of peace. And if heaven forbid, Hamas breaks the deal, then Trump can go to all of these folks and say, "Look, you're invested in this deal. Why don't you help us solve this problem?" So I think it's classic diplomacy. It's genius, and I hope that it works.
Yeah, I think the world hopes that it works. Everybody's got a vested interest in peace holding. Ambassador Michael Oren, Mick Mulvaney, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
All right. Coming up for us.